like with everybody, I started creating content. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go viral. I'm going to get famous. I'm going to do that. And it was about me. It was me, 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 me for my
Yeah.
mentality. But after I had flipped my perspective of, I just want to help one person. Like, I'm done with the how many likes and shares and all of that can I get from it. My message every single day, and this is the strategy that I apply every single day, just like the podcast that I released this morning on my live show.
Yeah.
If one person listens to that and gets value, that's all it's about to me.
Today, Chris Jolly joins us on the Systematic Selling Podcast. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn, stop what you're doing and go do it right now. He is known as hashtag the freight coach. He's a startup founder, and I think it's safe to say a builder of a freight media empire. And he's the host of the Freight Coach podcast. But he talks about more than just freight. He breaks down strategies for sales, marketing, and entrepreneurship, all of which apply to you and me on this podcast. So, without further ado, Chris, welcome to the pod.
Sean, thank you so much for having me on, man. Like we were talking before we started kind of getting into the show, man. It's been a few years since we met and really like we had talked there and
Yeah,
back in 2021 and that was I mean, it's kind of when I was just getting started with
it
everything.
was.
I'm literally as of this coming Saturday will be like 4 years into
Dude,
kind of doing all
congratulations.
of this right now. So it's been
Yeah,
a hell of a journey, man.
I love it. And I love the fact that a lot of that process is still fresh with you. And so today we're going to be talking about designing and executing your startup sales systems. But before we do, I'd like for our audience to get to know you a little better. And, you know, when it comes to, you being in the freight industry, we met because I was in the media covering the freight industry. And a lot of times we talk about, or at least I do, I say, you know what? I didn't go looking for transportation and freight. It, I
Yeah.
kind of fell into it. But what is your story? How did you get into the freight industry?
Yeah, so I come from a family of trucking at the end of the day.
Wow.
When my great grandparents immigrated from Germany back in the 1930s, they started a trucking company in Iowa. And
Wow.
that evolved into my dad becoming an owner op, and he drove for about 40 years. Uncles drove. My grandfather on my mom's side of the family, he was a dispatcher after he got out of I believe he was in the Marines in World War II.
Yeah.
And then he was a dispatcher for a long time out there. So it's like I've just been around this industry literally my entire life, and it's nostalgic to me, man. Like I was just giving a speech last week in Minnesota at the Minnesota Trucking Association, and I still talk about every time I hear a Jake break, man, I think of my dad. Like because like
Yeah.
we lived on this little hill, excuse me, and every time he'd come home, he'd hit the Jake brake to slow his engine down
Yeah.
and so even to this day, man, I'm 38 years old, and I still think of my dad as a little boy every time I hear one.
Yeah. That's amazing. Now, walk me through what your career path was then. What first off, where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Wisconsin, so I'm from a
Okay.
town of like 1,800. The best way to describe it is it's 50 miles northeast of Minneapolis,
Yeah.
Minnesota. And I grew up there, and I went to college right out of high school because I thought I had to.
Yeah.
And I dropped out after the first semester because I'm
Really?
like, man, college just isn't for me. I was 19 years old. I had life figured out
Yeah.
back then. And then I took some time and I just worked, right? Like I just worked in a warehouse, loaded trucks. And then I got back into college, I think when I was like 23 years old.
Yeah.
And I got my associate's degree. And then I moved out west. So I moved out to Reno, Nevada. My older brother moved out there a couple of years prior to that with his wife, and I just went out there. I'm like, I want to go do something else. I'm like, I need to get out of Wisconsin. I need to go try something new.
Yeah.
So Reno, Nevada, of all places, is where I ended up. It's not exactly a top destination for a lot of people, but it's exactly what I needed at that time. And that's how I actually got into freight as a freight broker is
Yeah.
I got in and started brokering freight there. And I lived there for about 9 years. I met my wife, and then we ended up moving down to Phoenix in, Phoenix, Arizona in 2019, December of 2019, and I've been here ever since. And it was one of those things where it's like, freight has I always knew I wanted to work in trucking. Like,
Yeah.
even like for the longest time, I wanted to be a driver. I wanted to drive trucks. But my that was like the one job that my dad was like, no, that's you can do anything you want, but I don't want you to drive trucks.
Why?
I I was Now that I'm older, like I get it. And I think it's because he didn't want think that he didn't progress. His children didn't progress, and
Mm.
he wanted more than that life. And and even like my uncles and my godfather and everybody who drove, they're like, It's just not that life for you."
Yeah.
And I never got it until I got a little bit older and I started like working in sales. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? The isolation probably would have drove me nuts at the
Right.
end of the day. But I have such a love for the industry as a whole because there's so much opportunity that's there. But like I don't just see trucks as a way to kind of make money. Like, I see a truckload of lumber and I think like that's literally going to build somebody's dream home. And
Mm.
I see like a piece of construction equipment going down. I'm like, maybe that's going for new construction for a building that somebody's worked there tirelessly to get out, and now they can build their dream building and everything else. So, it's a lot deeper of that to me. And, I think that, just like with everybody, I got a story just like everybody else. But I think that the older I get, I understand a lot more on why things were the way that they were. And I also understand that everything happens for a reason. Like, I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah. I want to hit on something that you just, when you were talking about what that freight means to you, you reframed it outside of the arena of a transaction and to something that seems meaningful to you, as if that is a motivating factor. And something that I can relate to on that, when I sold GM, medium, and light duty trucks, I didn't think about the trucks. Thought about the families that were involved in building each truck, the thousands of families that were, that were impacted because they contributed to building that truck. Every truck I sold gave people jobs. And that was a reframe for me that really motivated me. And it sounds like you did something similar in your path and freight.
Yeah, I think of it as, like I know what it's like to be like a child of a truck driver, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I don't look at a truck driver as like just another job because
Mm,
my dad missed a lot of events growing up, baseball games. He missed the birth of
it's
my
out on the road.
sister. There's a bunch of stuff that's out there, and so it's like when I see like, I don't just view things as a transaction, and that's changed since I started my own companies, man, because it's like I think that when you're young in business, in sales, or whatever, you think of more of how do you gain from this personally. And when it comes down to it, as soon as you flip your perspective, because like we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of business, and
Yeah.
you can't comprehend how much that actually is until it's your capital on the line. I think
Yeah.
I think people have a tough time conceptualizing that. But since it's my capital on the line now, and I know what it's like to work with a strong vendor and a not so strong vendor, that I just my perspective is kind of shifted on things. So it's like I don't view it as, oh, that's just a truckload. Like, no, because that's literally how I feed my family. Like, that is
Hmm.
what puts food on my son's plate and a roof over my wife's head. I
Hmm.
take this stuff very seriously. So it's a
Yeah.
lot deeper than how much money am I gonna make off of this?
Now, walk me through your career path then.
Mhm.
So, you were in Reno, you were doing warehouse jobs, you got into freight, and then you moved to Arizona. What where did you start in freight? You were a broker. What were you doing?
So my first real freight job was as a broker. Like I loaded trucks
Okay.
in college, Sean, and
Yeah.
my first job in freight was as I was just a broker at the time. I did carrier sales and then I did customer sales for a while. And then I worked in, middle management, which I hated to work in middle management at the time. I think that there's one thing, man, is it's like where you go from coworker to boss. And man,
Yeah.
that's a transition that I don't think a lot of people are actually prepared for.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and then I went and worked for a startup company. A buddy of mine who I was a broker with back in the day, he
Yeah.
started his freight brokerage, and I went and worked with him. And then when we decided to move down to Arizona, I just felt like I was lost, man. Like I was probably 33 at the
Yeah.
time, and I was like, what am I actually trying to do with my life? I thought at the time I was like, all right, I did everything I could as a broker. Let me go learn the assets. I'm going to learn assets for 5 to 7 years. And then I'm going to go make a C suite play one day because I'll have, 18, 19 years in the industry at that point. I'm going to be a shoe in for a C level position because I have brokerage and asset experienced. And so, it was early 2020. It was March of 2020. I had a bunch of interviews lined up. I resigned from my job on a Monday, and by Thursday, that
COVID.
thing in 2020 happened, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but then all of those opportunities went away. They were
Yeah.
all like, "Hey, we'll talk in July. We'll talk in July. We're not gonna make any hiring decisions right now."
Yeah.
And I'm, like, out of a job. I just moved to Arizona with my wife, and I'm like, "Well, shit, what am I gonna do?"
Yeah.
And, it's funny how it all kinda comes full circle. So, like, I'm a man of faith. I pray every single day. I read the Bible every single day.
Yeah.
And I had been praying for a long time at that time, Sean, where I'm like, "Man, I wanna be my own boss. I wanna do my own thing." And I remember vividly sitting in my brother-in-law's driveway because we had moved in with my brother-in-law, before we moved down to Phoenix, because like our lease ended in like October and then we weren't leaving till December because I didn't want to pull my son out of school in October. So I'm
Oh,
sitting there in his driveway and I'm like, I just want to be my own boss. I want to do my own thing. I want to be my own boss. I want to do my own thing. And they say the Lord works in mysterious ways. And that's my true feeling is that's why I started. And that's why everything happened the way it did, is because I would have never taken this route
yeah.
if I had no other option but to do it. I would have just taken another job at that point. I truly had to have 0 options but to start. And, there was no clear path. There was no I didn't know what the hell I was gonna do, but I was getting called to, like, just do something, right? And that's kinda how this all got started, and that was kinda my experience. It was a little fast forward through freight, but I don't need to get into granular details on how I used to broker loads back in the day, but,
Yeah.
that's kinda what led me into entrepreneurship and what I did in my career in trucking.
Yeah. You know, I see the call to entrepreneurship, and I believe it's a call because it's not for everybody. It it's a hard road. And I remember I, after college, I went into seminary and I was in seminary for a
Oh, wow.
semester. And I remember talking with one of the pastors and go, I don't know, I think this is the path that I want to go, but I'm not sure. And what the pastor said, those words have stuck with me since. He goes, it's got to be something where you can't do anything else. It has to be this overwhelming sense that that is all you can do. And I realized, you know what? That's not me. But I learned when I got into business that entrepreneurship is the same way. But I learned that that was me. That was my calling, to be out in the marketplace. And it is the one thing that sustains you out there as you're experiencing those hard things, is realizing I'm unemployable for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
you know it's like this is what I'm called to do, hell or high water. this is my path. And I imagine it sounds similar to what you experienced there in 2020.
Yeah, man, there was never going to be, because like I always wanted to be my own boss. I always thought I could do it better than everybody else, whether that
Yeah.
was a fault or a gift or however you want to look at it. But I always had a really hard time working with people who I didn't think were working as hard as I was. And, because I'm just I'm the kind of guy where it's like, man, if we're supposed to start at 6:30, be at your desk at 6:30. Don't stroll in at 6:40,
100%. Yeah.
6:45. Don't come in late, don't leave early, anything like that. Like I'm very rigid from that perspective. So I always had a really hard time working with people that I didn't think were working as hard as I was.
Yeah.
And that's why I always had a hard time working for other people. I would like to say I was a good employee because I showed up and I worked. And then especially it's like, man, I remember the first time I made six figures, I was like, how is this possible? Like how this is so much money. I didn't think that that was ever an attainable goal.
Right.
And then you do it. And then I'm like, damn, how do you guys not work hard? Like this is the most money. I'm like, this is so much. And it just got to a point where I was I would have like I said, I would have never done any of this unless I had no option to do it, and I
Yeah.
truly feel like the further and further I got down the road of entrepreneurship, 0 options is the only way to go, because if you have a plan B, if you're not fully committed to this life, and this is a 24/7, 365 commitment, and I'm not saying you have to work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, but you have to be able to work when most people aren't willing to do anything, especially in the beginning when you're getting anything off the ground, is you have to work harder than everybody else. I've never been naturally gifted outside of my work ethic.
Yeah.
And I was given that, like, that's the one gift. Like, I truly like, my dad didn't leave me an inheritance or anything like that, but he did truly give me a blank check in life because he showed me what a work ethic can do.
Yep.
And I'm seeing that now, Sean. I'm seeing that, like, damn, I'm just willing to do what others aren't willing to. And if you can stick with that long enough, success will find you.
Most definitely. And that's something I've observed in you following you the past 4 years is I've seen that work ethic in action every day you show up, which is a testament to that. Let's go back to that March 2020.
Yeah.
You know, everything is
Yeah.
going crazy with COVID. You lost your job options. Your only option now is to go into business for yourself. What were your first steps? What'd you do? Because you got to figure out a way to turn on some spigot
Yeah.
to get cash coming in to
Yeah.
justify living the next day and then the next and so forth. So walk me through those early days.
Yeah, so it was I just started posting because like my initial thoughts were, well, if it's 2 weeks and if people aren't going to be hiring till June, I'm like, I got a little bit of money saved up. Like we'll be all right. Like we're not going to lose our apartment or we're not going to go
Right.
hungry or anything like that, but I'm like, I just need to be candidate number 1 everywhere. Like when people start hiring, that's what I need. And
So at this time, you weren't thinking about starting a business. You're just trying to stay visible to hopefully,
yep.
if they, 2 weeks lockdown and then everything opens up
Yeah.
again that we thought was going to happen. Hey, opportunities will come back. So you hadn't come
Yeah.
up with your concept yet.
And that's exactly what it was for the first couple of weeks, and then, like,
Hmm.
so I just started posting every single day. I started talking about my experience in the transportation industry,
Yep.
and, I specialize in open deck and heavy haul transportation, and I had put a post out there, like, I don't know, it was probably around this time
Hmm.
in 2020, and then I actually had a really large broker reach out to me. They're like, "Hey, we wanna offer this. Could you talk to one of our sales reps about it and see, and just, tell them what you know?" And I'm like, "Well, shit, here's what's gonna happen. If this guy what I tell him he doesn't wanna do it, maybe they'll just hire me, and then I will start their heavy haul
Right.
division."
Right.
And so I talked to their sales rep. Fortunately, I never heard anything back from them, but that's kind of when my light bulb went off, Sean. I'm like, well, damn, if a company this size needs help with sales and operations training, who else does? So that's when I started my LLC. And I'm like,
Mhm.
all right, I'm going to do that. And I'm just going to offer sales training for the transportation industry.
Yeah.
And so I started a consultant firm, I guess you could call it that. And I was,
Did you get the Freight Coach brand at that point, or did this
yeah.
take time?
So the Freight Coach brand started because I did not want to call I didn't want to call myself the CEO of a laptop because
Mm.
I was in my bedroom, dude, in
Yep.
my apartment. Like it was a broken laptop. It was a busted ass folding table that I was working on.
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I the CEO of? I'm not the CEO of anything.
Right.
And I'm like, I'm going to be coaching people. I'm going to be talking about freight. So I'm going to call myself the freight coach.
Yep.
By a stroke of dumb luck, man, that was the smartest thing I ever did.
Genius.
Start calling myself the freight coach.
Yep.
And I do have that trademarked for anybody out there who is, might want to try and jump on that. But that's
Yeah.
where it kind of all started, man. Is I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm gonna be coaching people about freight. I'm gonna be teaching them about freight. That's what I'm just gonna go with, and I'm gonna run with that. And then, again, just like with everybody when they start a business, all the wealth just instantly dropped onto my lap because I started an LLC. I'm being completely facetious
Uh-huh.
in that. It was rough, man. It's like, dude, I didn't make money for like 18, 19 months. Like I broke even after like 11 months, I
Yeah.
think, is when I finally broke even in the sense of like I was able to pay all of my bills
Yeah.
without having to, because like, dude, I drained my 401k, I
Yep.
drained my savings, like I had nothing. And I'm like, figuring it out still to this day from that perspective. But like, I started creating content because, if you guys have followed Gary Vee at all,
Yep.
I love his stuff. I don't listen to him anymore because and he talks about this, right? He's like, eventually you got to stop listening to me and you need to apply it.
Yep.
And I did. I applied it. I got it all out there and I started building up everything. And for me is I started my podcast because I wanted to think of a way to market my services, right? And because Gary Vee talked about that. Like I was delivering pizzas at the time, and I was listening to one of his podcasts when I was delivering pizzas, and he's like, "Hey, start a podcast and then interview your prospects because he's like, you'll never find a founder who doesn't want to tell his story."
Yeah.
So I went to YouTube University. I figured out how to create a podcast and do all of that. And voila, nothing happened because everybody's like, wait, who are you? I've never
Uh-huh.
even heard of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, needless to say, it took a long time for me to really gain traction with that. Like, dude, it probably took almost 2 years in my perspective to really what I thought was like, all right, now I got something. Something's building here.
So you start the podcast, and this was going to be one of your lead generation, lead cultivation
Yep.
strategies. And even then, it took about 2 years for it to come to fruition. And how would you define that tipping point where you saw, okay, as you look back, this was worth the effort? What did that tipping point look like? How did you know you quote unquote arrived with that?
I think it was when I had like multiple companies reach out to me to advertise on my
Mm,
podcast. That's when I was like, holy, wait, you want to pay me what? You want to pay me to talk?
yeah.
Like, I'm doing this because like I'm trying to drive business my way. And then like, you guys want to pay me to do this? And I remember because the first company was like, hey, send us your marketing deck. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I'll have it to you by the end of the day. I'm like, what the fuck is a marketing deck?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I kind of figured all of that out, but I think a lot of it is I was able to monetize the podcast within a couple of years.
Mm,
And then when somebody like when they reached out to me to speak at an event, they're like, "Hey, we love what you're doing from a branding perspective. Do you want to speak on this panel?" And I'm like, "Wait, what?" that's when it was like, oh wow, because I went to this conference in 2021 and all of these people were like, dude, I love your stuff. I love your show. I love this. And I'm like, I had no idea because at the time, man, I'm still working out of my bedroom, right? Like I'm still
Yeah.
in my little apartment making it all happen.
Yep.
And yeah, that's when I was like, okay, I think I'm onto something here. And then that has grown month over month and all of the opportunities that are really coming from that. But it comes from the early days of when I'm not getting any traction on my podcast. I'm not getting any traction on my content. And I just kept showing up like clockwork every day and putting it out there. And I wrote a piece about this actually, not like a piece, it was like a blog, you could call it, I guess.
Yeah.
And I talked about my content journey and how if you once I stopped focusing on because just like with everybody, I started creating content. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go viral, I'm gonna get famous, I'm gonna do that. And it was about me. It was me, 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 me for my
Yeah.
mentality. But after I had flipped my perspective of I just want to help one person. Like I'm done with the how many likes and shares and all of that can I get from it? My message every single day, and this is the strategy that I apply every single day, just like the podcast that I released this morning on my live show.
Yeah.
If one person listens to that and gets value, that's all it's about to me. It's not about a million people a day downloading it or anything like that. I just want to help one person every single day. What value can I add to others? Because I follow Ed Milet a lot, and he talks about this. You're qualified to help the person that you once were.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of my content is it's geared towards the people who are at the exact same position that I am in business and in sales and everything else. And I just want them to know that you're not alone. All right.
Yeah.
Like I will willingly talk about this. You're not alone. And I want people to actually understand. I'm going to talk about, like, hey, this is what I'm seeing that's working out there
Mhm.
because I think that, again, I'm not the biggest fan of traditional media in today's day and age. I think it's geared more towards clicks and downloads than anything. And again, I get it. They got bills to pay and everything else, but like I want to be a education and a resource to others
Yeah.
that they can tap into and get value from.
I want to reinforce something there for our audience because what it sounds like you did was reframe your purpose to keep you sane while you're focused on showing up each and every day. Because if you did not do that reframe, you would not show up every day because you would be discouraged by the number of, whatever the case might be, whatever your expectations of engagement is, by taking your focus off of what is my engagement versus what is my impact on one person,
Yeah.
zeroing in. Now you have a mission and a purpose that allows you to just keep chopping away. There's a phrase, and it's my most recommended book in sales, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino, where he talks about each day that blow of the blade against the mighty oak may seem small and trifling, but it by one of these hits, that oak will eventually tumble. And then he goes on and say, so it will be with my efforts of today.
Yeah.
Just keep showing up, keep hitting that oak until eventually it tumbles. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did to keep you in the game.
No, it really was, right? Because like it's a dopamine rush, right? Like when you
It is.
start getting attention, it's a dopamine rush. It really is. You're addicted to and this is why I think so many people from a media perspective, from a content perspective, and even a business perspective, they keep pushing shit to the extreme, Sean, is because they need to feel that, everybody wants to be liked at the end of the day, but I think
Yeah.
most people want to be liked for the wrong reasons. They try and be a little bit of themselves to everybody as opposed to unapologetically being themselves.
Yep.
And I think that after that dopamine rush wears off and you start to realize, like, why am I doing this every single day? why am I chasing validation from other people? And again, I like the beauty of where we are in today's day and age is, from a content perspective, is there's so much free stuff out there.
Mhm.
You just need to go below the surface to see, has this individual actually done something? And
Mhm.
I think that once you can do that, so like again, I mentioned Ed Milet, Andy Frisella is another guy that I follow all the
Yep.
time. Gary Vee, same thing. Like these guys have built
They're
real
operators.
businesses.
Yep.
And if you break down fundamentally what they talk about, it's add value to others,
Mhm.
add value to others. Stop chasing the dopamine. That's one thing that Gary Vee, I think, does a phenomenal job of putting out there. And when he talks to people about his compassion and empathy, he's like, I just saw a clip about him the other day, actually. And he was like, somebody was like, hey, when I become something, and he stopped him. He's like, well, wait a second. You mean something right now. Don't forget that. And
Mhm.
what like that's what real leadership is about. That's what people who are really about adding value to the universe are doing is they're laying that groundwork. They're showing you like, "Hey, you just gotta do this," but it's not easy, right? Like, it's very, very challenging to get up and because like, I even know this with my own personal content here in the stuff that I put out from a media perspective. I
Yeah.
refuse to talk on the I call it the flavor of the week, man. It's the stuff that gets the most engagement on social media. I refuse to do that because here's who would benefit from that, me. I would benefit from that. I could
Right.
probably increase my revenue by charging more for my advertisers and just play that game, but I also think in the short term that would work. In the long term, that would start to work against me because my advertisers are gonna be like, "Well, wait a second, you keep getting more and more risky with what
Right.
you're saying, and I think that eventually that works against you." And from my perspective, like I've identified my path and I'm staying on my path and I'm not going to deviate away from that path.
Yeah.
My path is to educate the transportation industry through my experiences, through conversations, by bringing on subject matter experts from different angles of the industry and delivering that message. That's from a media perspective, what I'm going to continue to do. That is what's going to bring long-term sustainability.
Now there's the media side of your business, which what we've been talking about. And at first it was a content marketing play.
Yeah.
Now it's a business and revenue stream in and of itself. What are some of the other revenue streams that you do in your business? And this would be I guess you have a two, three businesses under that
Yeah.
freight coach banner.
Yeah, so it is so I'd have Freight Coach Enterprises, which is the media stuff, and then I
Mhm.
started Freight Coach Logistics,
Okay.
and then that is where I'm an independent freight agent for SPI,
Okay.
and we are, we're out there building that up right now, and then back in 2020, late 2020, early 2021, I was brought in a co-founder of a company, Broker Carrier,
Yeah.
it's carrier identity, onboarding, and then really it's like a capacity management platform
Okay.
where I was brought on a lot of it for my IP. My business partner built everything, but he took a lot of what was going on in my head and how I operate as a freight broker, and
Yeah.
we built that up. But I don't do it's kind of like I took on a lot,
Yep.
way more than I probably should have. Fortunately, they're all in the exact same vertical. So all of my businesses, like the media stuff, I only talk about freight.
Mm.
Freight brokerage, obviously, I only sell freight and everything else. So they're all kind of inside of the same vertical, but from a time perspective, it might seem like, oh shit, this guy owns three companies. It's a lot. It's
Right.
a lot of work. And if I could, I don't regret doing it the way that I did it because I'm the type of person, Sean, where you could tell me the stove is hot, but I'm gonna touch it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, but because you hear all the time from people who are like, "Hey, focus on one thing
Right.
and then expand out."
Right.
I needed to go through this to actually truly understand what that meant.
Yeah. Now going to where you're selling where you're selling freight, what what is your approach to finding customers there? Are you getting it mostly through your recognition through the podcast and your content? Or are you doing cold outreach? What's your system there?
It's all cold outreach is what I'm
Okay.
doing. I wish I had a ton of inbound leads from my podcast and,
Sure.
you know, that worked out from a shipper's perspective, but it hasn't materialized, but cold outreach is all I do. Cold calling, cold email, site visits. I try and get in front of as many people as possible because I feel like they will actually understand how much I care
Yeah.
about the opportunity when I'm sitting in a room with them as opposed to hiding behind an email or even a brief cold call, right? Like I wanna get out there and talk to people.
Yeah. What what is your advice as in terms of approach to cold outreach? How do you do it? How do you do it well?
So I have had the ability to pay for lead generation software. I've also worked in an environment where I only had Google to
Right.
use. And today's day and age, I think that there's a lot of great tools out there if you can afford them, but there
Yeah.
is nothing wrong with identifying what your target market is and going to Google. Google's free, right?
Mhm.
Google in an Excel spreadsheet, like, because
Yeah.
you know, and I want to before I go any further on this, I want to let it be known, like I bootstrap everything, you guys. I do not have investors. I do not like this is all dollar in, dollar out
Yeah.
built
Yeah.
here. So I think it's very important to preface that before what I'm about to say. If you can afford lead generation software, pay for it because it is
Mhm.
worth it. You can become a lot more streamlined in your approach. But if you can't, because it's expensive, right? Google and Microsoft Office. And Microsoft Office will cost you $99 a year. Build up an Excel spreadsheet, and then when you have your target market identified, drop the company name, go to their website. You might find the right contact information on there. Put their phone number in, and then here's another thing too. This is why I love social media so much. LinkedIn's free, so if you're in
Yeah.
logistics or trucking or whatever industry, just search whatever job title is the decision maker in your vertical on LinkedIn for your target companies, and it'll list those people on there. So you can use that from a business development tool, and it's all free. It'll literally cost you $100 on top of your cell phone bill, whatever that is, and your internet connection. And it's all cold outreach from that perspective. But I don't just call people for the sake of calling them. I'm very
Mhm.
hyper focused on who I'm reaching out to. Like I'm not a generalist in freight. I specialize in open deck and heavy haul. So when you hear that, that's flatbed, that's step deck, that's hot shot, RGN, stuff like that. So those are the only shippers that I'm calling. Those are the only shippers I'm trying to develop a partnership with and really build with. And I think that it is imperative when you're in business of any industry to be undeniably better than everybody at one thing.
For you, what is that?
For me in particular, it is my ability to communicate at a very
Mhm.
high level. And when I say that, I'm not trying to make it sound like I use terminology and verbiage that is, it's
Yeah.
just being brutally honest with people. If I can't do something, I won't commit to it. At this point in my like, I am not in a position as a business owner to turn away revenue or walk away from revenue, but I do because it doesn't align with the core competency of what I'm trying to do. I don't want to get I'm already pulled in enough directions as is.
Yeah.
I can't get pulled in even more directions because it lowers the quality of my work at that point.
Yep.
Like I said, I'm already stretched thin as it is. And I need to put the best product out there. And what I found from a transportation perspective or a logistics perspective is just being brutally honest with people and then just letting them know that you can't do something. And this is applicable to any business out there. If you can't do something, you will never lose a customer for telling them that you cannot do that at that time.
Yeah. And chances are you'll gain a referral or they may become a customer later when their need aligns with your solution.
Yeah. Here's a prime example. So literally this morning, I was on a sales call, a Zoom call with a prospect of mine. After we talked, everything that he was really in need of, could I do it? Yes, I could do it. Does it align with my core competency right now? No, it does not. And when I told him, I'm like, hey, you know what? LTL, oh man, like if you're set up with an LTL carrier, that's the best pricing you're going to get. The majority of your freight's dry van. Listen, man, I could do it, but it's just not what I'm looking to do right now. So I think that it would probably be best that, that we It's just not going to be a fit. Every time I told my prospect no, their eyes lit up. Wait, you're telling me the truth there. You
Yeah.
know, I'm like, because listen, if you have anything that you want to ship on a flatbed to a job site, something like that, I'm your guy for that. Anything above that, though, that's not where I'm looking to do. And that the conversation ended with this: "Hey, man, I really appreciate your time. I want to continue to talk to you, though."
Love it.
Like, I literally just told him, like, "Hey, I can't do 80% of the stuff that you need," but he still wants to talk to me because I was honest with him. And that is, that's like one of the golden rules besides treat others as you want to be treated is honesty is the best policy. We've all heard that, right?
Yeah.
Honesty is always the best policy in business.
The goal of the systematic selling framework is to build impeccable trust. And what impeccable trust is you build such a high level of trust that the folks that you're dealing with will beg to buy whatever you're willing to sell from them.
Mhm.
And your example right there is a prime example of what that looks like.
It will save you so many headaches
Yes, it will.
when you sell to your capabilities
Mhm.
and your core competencies, and you hold firm on that. And it's tough. It is so tough when you don't know how you're gonna pay your bills
Yep.
and your cash flow's dwindling and you might have 30, 60, 90 days of cash left and, you're not you think you could do something, but you know deep down that you shouldn't. It's that's the worst situation to be in long term, because that's how you have to be thinking about business,
Mhm.
very the first couple of years, man, it was very short term mindset. It was very, how do I survive?
Yep.
Now I'm like, how do I sustain for the next 24 months or 36 months? Because my brand goes with me no matter where I go. And I want people, no matter what their experience is with my company, I want them to be like, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whatever it was, I want them to look at it and be like, "Well, damn, they did everything they could in that situation."
Yeah.
Or, "I appreciate their honesty in that situation." That's what I wanna go off of because, again, you'll never be punished in business for doing the right thing. You won't do that either, and that's my number 1 core value in my business is do the right thing, and that is at my own personal expense, but welcome to entrepreneurship. There's a lot of stuff that's at your own personal expense, but to me, we all know the difference between right and wrong. We all know whether we can do something or we can't. And I'm not going to say don't take risks, okay? Because everything is a risk, but you need to be calculated in the risks that you take. Don't be reckless because you think like, oh, I think I might be able to figure it out. Don't do that. If you've never done something before, but you know you can do it,
Yep.
there's a difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to recap the process on the cold outreach. So you defined your ICP, you bootstrapped how you developed your list. Initially you go through and go, okay, I know what my ICP is. Where can I find them on Google? You get on Google, you get on LinkedIn, you gather their contact information. And what you're doing at this stage doesn't necessarily scale, but that doesn't matter at this point. You're building your initial list, you're building your initial system. And then you talked about when you had conversations, which would be in that discovery, you know, uh, system that you're doing in between that. So you've got your list and you've had scheduled the appointment and you're engaging in that discovery meeting. How do you arrive at that meeting? What is your approach in the cold outreach to to open that door for a meeting?
Yeah, a lot of it is I don't go into any cold call or cold outreach of what can I gain from this.
Mhm.
I want it to be I just want them to remember me. I
Okay.
want them to remember me because it doesn't matter whether it's in freight or any industry. People get inundated with sales emails, calls, everything every single.
100%.
I just want them to remember my name when they need me. So it's like my big value proposition right away is, hey, this is what we specialize in. if I'm local or if I'm in their area, I'll always ask, like, can I stop by and introduce myself in person? But for the
Yeah.
most part, is hey, I'm just trying to extract a little bit of information from you and find when is the best time that I can follow up. Because the reality is it's always an inconvenience when you're cold calling somebody,
Yeah.
especially if it's not expected. So I always want to try and set a time to talk with somebody.
Yeah.
And that is kind of the big thing is hey, I just want them to remember me. Cold call too. Hey, I take detailed notes. I called you on April 23rd. You told me to call me back at this time. I'm calling you back at this time. Again, this is Chris Jolly. I'm the co-founder of Freight Coach Logistics. Oh, you're not good right now? Perfect. When's a good time for me to call you back? All right, perfect. Then that date comes up again. Hey, I
Yeah.
talked to you on the 23rd of April. I followed up with you on May 9th. Here we are. It's June 10th. And taking detailed notes and getting just one little thing from
Yeah.
that call to leverage is the bad word, but to kind of like rely on the next outreach where again, because they're like, oh, wait a second, they'll go back to that moment and they'll be like, yeah, we did talk. I do remember you.
Yeah.
But if you don't take that effort and take detailed notes of your call, when you call back, you're going to sound just like another voice.
How do you track those notes? Or do you still do it, analog on paper? Do you use a CRM? What is your approach that you prefer right now that's intuitive and
Yeah.
works for you?
I have a CRM, but I use an Excel spreadsheet. I track everything on an Excel spreadsheet, and it's
Yeah,
just because I'm
same
familiar.
way. Yep.
That's all.
Yeah, same way. And so when we talk about cold outreach, that can be either cold calls, emails, DMs, so forth. If I'm hearing you correctly, is your preferred mode of cold outreach actually cold calls
It's
with the phone?
a cold call to set up a site visit is what I
Mm,
wanna do more than
yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
I don't wanna just cold stop by an organization. I think it's kinda almost I don't wanna say it's off-putting because there's a time and a place. There's a preferred way of selling for everybody out there,
Yeah.
but my preferred method is, "Hey, I'm local. Can I just stop by and introduce myself? This is what we do."
Yeah.
And that to me is the best way to kinda get in front of somebody because I think in today's day and age when everybody's looking to automate everything, if you bring that human element back to the table, I think
Mm,
it's very appealing out there. And, from my perspective, like, again, I am the brand. So it's like, it's very important that I take care of myself. I don't wanna walk in to a place and not be like I have a beard if you're watching this on video, but
yeah.
it's like I don't like I'm clean shaven in a sense of like it's lined
Yeah.
up. It's
Yep.
not, in like my hair. Yeah, I'm wearing a backwards hat right now, but like I get my hair cut every 2 weeks. Like I'm put together when I walk into somebody's organization, right? So again,
Yeah.
I think that, on top of that too, like I'm pretty damn good shape as well. So it's like I feel like most people are going to look at that and be like, oh, if he's that disciplined to keep himself in shape and keep himself in check, his service is probably gonna be pretty disciplined as well, right? I think it's all tied together and it's all part of your brand.
I'm going to hit the pause button on there real quick because you bring up a very important point. Look, y'all, when we're running businesses and we're wearing many hats, we're talking about sales right now, but that's one aspect of the business. We've got everything else that we're running. But what Chris just brings up right here is the importance of taking care of yourself, taking care of your body. And a lot of times we talk about that as work-life balance, which as an entrepreneur,
That's it.
that's really hard to achieve. But one way to reframe that where you're taking care of yourself is you realize that your workout is part of your work. Your The way you feel and approach the day, how you look is a part of sales. And it's not just what you wear, but how you take care of your body and everything else creates first impressions, whether that's fair or not. That's the reality. So I challenge you if you're struggling to find that little time to work out, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you can find, but see it as part of your work day because that is something that can impact your business and your ability to generate revenue. So I'll
I'm
hand it
gonna
back to you on that,
No,
Chris.
dude, I'm gonna take it one step further for everybody. Everybody has Instagram,
Yeah.
probably, right?
Yeah.
Go to your Instagram, go to your profile, click on the three dots or the three lines that are in the upper right-hand corner of your profile. And I want you to go down time spent. That will tell you how much time you actually
There
have
you go.
because most people spend 2+ hours a day on social media. And, again, you always have an excuse to not do something. And again, it's the discipline aspect of this stuff, Sean, where it's like if you don't take care of if you find a reason to not do something in your personal life, you're going to find that same reason to not do it in your business as well, because there's always busyness to do.
Yep.
There's always stuff to do out there, but you got to take care of yourself. I truly feel like the best statement I can make is when I walk into somebody's office. And again, my body, my physique is a direct reflection of my discipline. I've
Yes.
I've came to that conclusion. And this is coming from somebody who was an obese drunk for the majority of my adult life.
Wow.
Okay. I drank almost every single day from the age of 16 to 34 years old.
Mm.
All right. So take that for what it's worth. I will take the results that I'm getting in my life now than I ever did leading up to this point by creating that disciplined out there because I truly feel like it's all connected.
It
It's
is.
all connected. All of your inputs, outputs, everything is connected.
It really is. Before we move off of the cold outreach,
Yeah.
there's a common perception that cold calling is dead. It's nobody, it's 2024. Nobody's answering their phone. I mean, I have to confess, I don't answer mine. It goes straight to voicemail. But depending on the market that you're going after, a lot of times they're expecting to be called on. So I imagine that that's what your market is because these people buy shipping and that's their job. So walk me through your philosophy on cold calling and why the cold calling is dead is wrong, at least in your from your perspective.
So here's what I'm going to say. Here's one thing that I've relied on in business, and I've came to this realization. Again, I've
Yeah.
got great mentors in the form of Andy Frisella and Ed Milet. Again, the majority of the stuff that I've done from them was from their free content that they used to put out there. I'm a member of the RTA Syndicate now, but they had said something on their well, one of them did on their podcast, and it was on their free podcast, which is out there. So go listen to their stuff and you might find it. But they had said a general consensus in business, and this is something that I can say is 100% true as well. If everybody is saying run to the right, turn to the left and sprint to the left because
Yeah.
that is where all the results are. So anybody out there who is saying cold calling is dead, start cold. If society is saying something is wrong, do the opposite. And
Yeah.
that's where all the success is going to be. I have found, and my business partner can attest to this because I've been cold calling in freight brokerage for 14 years.
Mm.
Recently, and I told him this. I'm like, I have never received this much positive feedback from a cold call in the entirety of my career. And I think it has gotten to the fact that most people aren't doing it. And if they are doing it, they can't even complete a sentence.
Yeah.
So the fact that I have a clear, concise message and I can articulate myself properly. And again, this isn't like leading to a ton of business or anything like that, but it's not as bad as you think it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had somebody hang up on me today. I had another person, not want to talk to me today and claim that they couldn't hear me, hang up the phone. But that's it, right? But for the most part, people are very cordial if you're prepared.
What is your mental approach to push through those times when folks will hang up on you or maybe not be so cordial?
It affects me in the moment because I'm competitive and
100%.
I got feelings just like everybody else has
Yeah.
feelings. But I also look at it from this perspective a lot. I as you get older, you go through real life shit, and I know that there's a finite amount to the time that I have on this earth, and I really kind of just boiled down to this, man. A, they're not going to remember you 5 seconds after you call them.
Yeah.
So why give them 5 minutes? And B, 60, 70 years from now, man, none of this shit's going to matter anyways.
Yeah.
So it's like, and the same thing from like in those early days in business and just business development and dealing with the rejection, because you get rejected. And here's one thing that I want everybody who hears this podcast to understand: you will get rejected 99% of the time. That is just the reality. And if you listen to the most successful sales reps out there, the most successful entrepreneurs out there, they will tell you 98% of the time you lose. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's a game of resilience and grit. And to reinforce what you were just talking about there, one of the ways that I think of pushing through that fear of rejection is I think of this. If you truly believe in what you're selling, then you owe it to your prospects and customers to get the word out. In fact, you have a moral imperative to do so. The
Yep.
moment you do that, the no's have no power over you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're very true. It's very true, Sean. And I just think that, at the end of the day, you're never working as hard as you think in those moments. I think like there's always time to do more, right? So it's like
Yeah.
wherever you are, take a baseline, of how you can increase your outputs and everything else, and actually track like what are you doing in a day. And then you know what, if you're making 5 cold calls a day, for
Mhm.
example, and that's all you're trying to do right now to develop business, do that. Make sure you hit your numbers every single day. And then after 2 weeks, increase it to 7.
Yeah.
All right. And then after those 2 weeks, increase it to 10. And then all of a sudden you're building it up, and then you're building that system around it where you're like, yeah, what, the rejection's not that bad. I'm making so many calls at this point. I don't even think about all the no's that I'm getting because I'm focusing on the fact that there could be a yes behind the next one. And that's really where you need to shift your perspective to in a lot of that, I think.
Anything that we haven't talked about today that you think would be important for our audience to know about?
Think, and again, I don't have it all figured out. I'm still on my journey. I'm still trying to figure everything out and I'm still learning. I think that once you understand that you don't know anything, you got a lot, and like you have a lot to learn, you're in actually a really good spot.
Mhm.
Because I think the second you think you have it all figured out, that's when challenging times are going to start to present themselves to you. So you have to accept the fact that this is a lifelong journey in entrepreneurship and you got to be a student of the game every single day. But you also need to attack it as, I always wanted to be a professional athlete. And I heard this on a podcast recently because, again, like I'm a student of the podcast game. Like I listen, I love hearing how people interview others and because I'm always looking to learn. But I I treat myself as a professional athlete in business.
Mm.
So, how prepared am I for meetings? Like you're saying, like when you're calling people because you can add value to
Yeah.
them, it takes the rejection down a couple of notches off of that. But when you prepare, when you train yourself, whether it's reading, and that's another thing too. I've struggled with comprehension, I've struggled with all of
Mhm.
that, but I've fallen in love with reading. I've fallen in love with it now, where it's like that's the one thing that I do every single day
Yeah.
without fail is I read at least 10 pages every single day. And I think like it's minimizing your distractions, right? Like I had mentioned about, drinking heavily for a very long time. When you can eliminate, when because you all know if you're drinking too much, if you're fucking around too much, you know
Yeah.
that you're doing it. Stop it. Stop doing that. Eliminate your distractions and focus on what can you do to just get a little bit better every single day. And I've done 75 hard a couple of times. I would highly recommend everybody start with 75 hard. It's the best mental program that's out there. It's probably been the biggest value add to myself as a man, and it's free, by the way. Just Google it. But
Google 75 hard.
yeah, Google 75 hard, the program's all out there. It's a free program and
Got it.
everything. And, but the thing is, man, is it's like you just got to get you just got to get your shit in order when it boils down to it, right? Like I said, we all know when we're doing stuff that we shouldn't, or we're doing stuff
Yeah.
too much. And I think like once you can get your mind right, you can get your body right. And once you can kind of get those two things moving in the right direction, you're going to really start to build momentum with that. But I think like most importantly, you need to understand that A, it's okay to feel lost most of the time because I feel lost most most days. And B, once you accept the fact that this is a lifelong journey and you're never going to have all the answers to everything, I think that things start to make a lot more sense.
Chris, it's so great catching up with you, man.
Yeah, man.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime, Sean.